Now here is a strange thought, and I want you to sit with it for a moment before you decide whether you agree or disagree. The thought is this: you are not a person who happens to be living in the universe. You are the universe, temporarily doing something it calls being a person. You are not a passenger on this spinning rock. You are the rock, waking up and wondering what it is. Now, this sounds at first like some kind of mystical exaggeration, the sort of thing people say when they've had too much incense and not enough sleep. So let's slow down and look at it properly, because it isn't mystical at all. It is, if anything, extremely ordinary, so ordinary that we have trained ourselves not to notice it. Consider your skin. We are taught from the earliest age that the skin is a kind of wrapping paper, a boundary, the place where you stops and everything else begins. Inside the wrapping paper is the person. Outside the wrapping paper is the world. And once you have accepted that boundary, you spend the rest of your life feeling like a stranger, looking out through two small holes in your face, at a universe that is fundamentally not you, and might, at any moment, do you harm. But watch what happens if you ask a very simple question. Could you exist without the rest of it? Could there be a you without air to breathe, without a sun to grow the food, without a mother and a father, without the whole unbroken chain of stars cooking up the carbon in your bones? Of course not. You did not come into this world, you came out of it, the way a leaf comes out of a tree, or a wave comes out of the ocean. Nobody looks at a wave and says, "My goodness, how did that piece of water get into the ocean?" The wave is not in the ocean. The wave is the ocean, doing something momentarily wave-shaped. And you are not in the universe. You are the universe, doing something momentarily U-shaped. Now, if this is true, and I rather think it is, then a very interesting question arises. Why would the universe go to all this trouble? Why would this vast humming process of stars and rivers and cells and thought bother to pretend for 60 or 80 or 90 years that it is a single small person, named whatever your name happens to be, worrying about the rent? I think the answer has to do with a very old human pastime, and that is the game of hide and seek. Every child knows the delight of hiding. Not the delight of being lost forever, mind you, but the delight of hiding well enough to give the seeker a good, long, satisfying search, and then, at last, of being found. If you hid so well that nobody could ever find you, the game would stop being fun and would start being tragic. And if you did not hide at all, if you simply stood in the middle of the room announcing your position, there would be no game whatsoever. The whole pleasure of it depends on a temporary, voluntary, and ultimately reversible forgetting of where you are. I suspect the universe is playing exactly this game, on the grandest possible scale, and you are one of the places it has decided to hide. Think about what it would mean for the universe, this single, undivided process, to know everything about itself all at once, forever, with no gaps, no surprises, and no discovery. It would be rather like reading the last page of a novel first. Technically, you would possess all the information, but you would have lost the entire experience of not knowing, which is, after all, most of what makes an experience worth having. So instead, the universe does something remarkably clever. It divides its attention into billions of separate points of view, each one convinced, at least for a while, that it is separate from all the others, each one looking out at the rest of existence as though it were a stranger looking at strangers. And from each of these points of view, it gets to rediscover itself, one lifetime at a time, one face at a time, one pair of eyes at a time. You are one of those eyes. You are the universe, peeking out from behind the particular curtain of your own face, having temporarily forgotten that the hand holding the curtain and the face behind it are made of exactly the same stuff. Now, somebody is going to object, and rightly so, and say, "But I do not feel like the universe. I feel like a rather small, rather anxious person, stuck in traffic, worried about a phone call I have to make on Monday." And this is precisely the point. The forgetting has to be convincing, or the game does not work. A hiding place you can see through is no hiding place at all. But here is the wonderful part. You can, if you look closely enough, always feel the edges of the disguise. Have you ever, late at night, or staring at the ceiling, or standing very still in a forest, felt a sudden and inexplicable sense that all of this is far too strange to be an accident, that existence itself is somehow impossible and yet undeniably here? That flicker, That shiver up the spine when you consider that there is something rather than nothing is the universe momentarily catching sight of its own reflection through your eyes, and being, for just a second, astonished at itself. Children have this feeling constantly, before they are taught to file it away as nonsense. A child will ask, quite seriously, "Where was I before I was born?" And we laugh and give some answer about biology, and the child is not satisfied, because the child is not really asking a biological question. The child is asking a much older question, the same question the universe has been asking itself since it first learned to ask anything: what is on the other side of this particular hiding place? Now, before we go any further, I want to point out how thoroughly we are trained out of noticing any of this. From the time you are very small, you are placed on what feels like a ladder. First, there is the business of getting through kindergarten so that you may proceed to the first grade. Then the first grade is merely preparation for the second, and the second for the third, and so on, up and up, year after year, until at last you arrive at the great threshold of what we solemnly call the real world, as though everything before it had been make-believe. And once you are there, the ladder does not stop. Now it is a career, a promotion, a house, a retirement, each rung promising that satisfaction is one step further up, and each rung, once reached, revealing yet another rung above it. Nobody tells you when you may stop climbing, and simply notice that you have arrived. And so most people spend the whole of their lives one rung short of arriving, which is a very curious position for the universe to have engineered for itself, considering it already has everything, everywhere, all at once, and only forgets this while it is busy pretending to be you. Now, let us return to the skin, because I think the skin is where the whole misunderstanding really lives. We think of ourselves as a noun, a fixed thing, a solid little parcel of self, delivered at birth and collected at death. But you are not a noun at all. You are a verb. You are not a thing that the universe has. You are something the universe is doing, the way a flame is not a thing sitting inside the fire, but something fire is doing. Blow away the burning, and there is no flame left over, hiding somewhere, waiting to be reused. And in the same way, you are not a soul that has been inserted into a body and must someday be extracted from it like a coin from a machine. You are an activity of the whole universe, happening in this particular location, for this particular stretch of time, the way a whirlpool is an activity of the river, happening in this particular bend, for this particular while. Nobody grieves for a whirlpool. When the water moves on and the whirlpool disappears, we do not say the river has suffered a terrible loss. We understand that the whirlpool was never a separate thing to begin with, only a temporary shape the river was making, and that the water which composed it has not vanished at all, but has simply gone on to make other shapes, further downstream. Now, I am not saying this to be flippant about death, because death, from where you happen to be standing, is an enormous and serious matter, and I would never ask you to pretend otherwise. But I think it is worth noticing that from the point of view of the whole river, nothing has actually been lost. The pattern that was briefly recognizable as you gets folded back into the general flow, the way a tune, once played, does not vanish from existence, but becomes part of the silence that follows it, still somehow present in the shape of the quiet. There is a very old habit human beings have of taking this whole business much too seriously, and I think it is worth asking why. I suspect it is because we have confused the game with a test. A game, you understand, you can lose without any real disaster, because the whole point was the playing. A test, on the other hand, has consequences. You can fail a test, and so if you believe your life is a test, set by some stern examiner, you will spend the whole of it anxious, glancing over your shoulder, waiting for the grade. But if you understand your life as a game the universe is playing with itself, for the sheer pleasure of playing, then a great weight lifts off your shoulders, because you realize that even your worst mistakes are simply moves in the game, not evidence submitted at some final trial. There is another way of seeing this same confusion, and it has to do with the difference between a thing and the name we give it. We are given, very early on, a name, and we are told, in 1,000 small ways, that this name is who we are. But your name is not you, any more than the word water is wet, or the word fire burns the page it is written on. Your name is a label pasted onto something far too large and far too strange to fit inside a label, in exactly the same way that a 5-pound note is a symbol for wealth, but is not itself wealth. You cannot eat a £5 note. You cannot live in a mortgage document. And yet people spend entire lifetimes accumulating symbols, more money, more titles, more approval, more followers, mistaking the ledger for the feast, and wondering at the end of it why the ledger, however large, never quite tasted of anything. The self works the same way. You have an image of yourself, a story you tell about who you are, what you like, what you believe, what sort of person you are trying to become. And this story is useful, the way a map is useful. But you are not the map. You are the territory the map is a poor and hurried sketch of. And so when someone criticizes your name, your image, your story, you feel as though they have wounded the territory itself, when in fact they have only scribbled on the map, which you were always free to redraw. This is why the mystics of every tradition, when pressed to describe reality directly, so often fall into silence, or paradox, or laughter, because reality itself will not fit inside the very symbols we would need to describe it. The finger pointing at the moon is not the moon, and if you spend your whole life studying the finger, admiring its shape, arguing about its exact angle, you will die having never once looked up. This is why the old Chinese sages talked about a principle they called Wu Wei, which is usually translated as non-action, but really means something closer to not forcing. It means swimming with the current instead of thrashing against it, sailing the wind instead of rowing dead into it. And I think Wu Wei becomes possible only once you have understood that you are not a stranger fighting the ocean, but the ocean temporarily under the impression that it is a swimmer. Once you know that, the thrashing stops looking like courage and starts looking like a rather comic misunderstanding, a wave attempting to escape the sea. So what does the universe get out of pretending to be you, specifically? I think the honest answer is an experience it could not have any other way. Every point of view is a completely unrepeatable angle on existence. Nobody else has ever seen a Tuesday morning through precisely your eyes, with precisely your memories propping up the moment, with precisely your peculiar sense of humor deciding what is funny about it. When you notice the particular blue of the sky today, or feel the specific ache of missing somebody, or laugh, really laugh, at something ridiculous, that is not a small private event happening to a small private person. That is the universe, discovering, through you, and only through you, exactly what a Tuesday morning like this one feels like from the inside. Which means, strangely enough, that you matter enormously, not because you are separate and important, but precisely because you are not separate, and the universe has no other way of having this particular experience except through you. Now you might reasonably ask, if all of this is true, why does it not simply feel true? Why, when you wake up tomorrow morning, will you not instantly feel like the universe, but will instead feel like a rather ordinary person who is late and has forgotten where the car keys are? I think the answer is that most of us never stop talking. There is a voice in the head that comments on everything, narrates everything, worries about everything, and this voice is so constant, so relentless, that we mistake it for ourselves. We think, I am the one doing all this thinking, when in fact you are the silence the thinking is happening in, the screen the film is being projected onto, not the flickering pictures themselves. This is why every contemplative tradition, in its own language, eventually arrives at the same instruction, which is simply to stop talking to yourself for a moment and listen. Not listen for an answer, because the moment you go looking for an answer, you have started talking again, only more quietly. Just listen, the way you might listen to rain, without needing the rain to mean anything or lead anywhere. It is in that gap, that brief and ordinary silence, that the universe occasionally remembers what it is, and finds, to its own quiet amusement, that it has been you all along. I want to end with something a little playful, because I think play is closer to the truth of things than solemnity ever is. Next time you catch yourself in the middle of an ordinary moment, brushing your teeth, waiting for a kettle, watching rain slide down a window, try this small experiment. Instead of thinking I am looking at the rain, try on the thought, just for a moment, the universe is looking at the rain, through this particular window, using these particular eyes. Notice what changes. Nothing dramatic happens. The rain does not stop. The kettle still boils in its own time. The traffic, if you are in traffic, does not part for you like some biblical sea. But something in the chest loosens slightly. Some old and tired muscle you did not even know you had been clenching for years, because you have remembered, just for a moment, that you were never really hiding from anything except yourself. and that the seeker and the hidden were, all along, exactly the same player, enjoying in this very moment one more round of the oldest game there is. And perhaps that is the whole secret, if there is one. Not to solve existence, as though it were a puzzle with a final answer printed upside down at the back of the book, but to notice, every so often, that you are not reading the book at all. You are the one who wrote it, who is writing it still, one breath, one Tuesday, one ordinary rainy afternoon at a time, and who has simply, for the pure joy of the game, forgotten your own handwriting.